several months back at this point, I was down in Oxford. You might remember I went down there to speak to a journalism class. While I was there, I decided to pop over to the Ole Miss basketball practice facility and spend some time with Chris Beard and his staff and watch practice. And I think we talked about that when I came back. And I told you I thought they were going to be pretty good, and they are pretty good. When I was down there, we're talking about a million different things. And at some point, I'm sitting in Chris's office, and he says something along the lines of like Jaemyn and Brandon. And Brandon didn't immediately pop out of my, I go, who's Brandon? And so then he goes, oh, that's like Jaemyn's little brother almost, kind of. And I was like, what? And so we start talking. What I find out is, for people who are unfamiliar, Jaemyn is Jaemyn Brakefield. He has been a starter at Ole Miss since arriving at Ole Miss. Was a five-star prospect coming out of high school and signed with Duke, Mike Krzyzewski. Went to Duke, played a season, transferred to Ole Miss. He's been starting there. Coming off the bench this season as their sixth man. He might be sixth man of the year in the country if they hand out an award like that. He's averaging double figures for a nationally ranked Ole Miss team. So the story is this. I started asking questions, and this is what I learned. Jaemyn Brakefield was born in Wisconsin, grew up in Wisconsin. When you watch an Ole Miss basketball game, you might hear them say, and he's from Mississippi because he did eventually move to Mississippi. But he was born in Wisconsin. A single mother. And, he had some older siblings. His mother had her first child when she was 13 years old. He has an older brother who's 15 years older than him. Dad lived out of state. So mom was in Wisconsin and dad was in Mississippi. And he didn't have like strong father presence in his home. And his older brother, Andrew, who went on to serve our country. He served in Iraq. He's a veteran. And best I can tell, it's been a real inspiration for Jaemyn. Jaemyn didn't have his father in his life his whole time, but he had his older brother. And he looked up to him, and that's who he played basketball with, threw the football with. Just, they had a real relationship. Eventually, Jaemyn moved to Mississippi to be with his dad, and then moved to Huntington, West Virginia to go to prep school at Huntington Prep. It's the same prep school that Andrew Wiggins went to, Keldon Johnson, several NBA players. Jaemyn gets invited to join Huntington Prep. He moves to Huntington Prep. So at this point, he's like 14, 15 years old, in that range. And his life experience has basically been this. He lives in Wisconsin with his mom, kind of. Lives in Mississippi with his dad, kind of. Bounces from friend's house to friend's house a little bit. And then eventually ends up at Huntington, West Virginia without either parent playing basketball. Living away from both parents his entire high school career. This is his life. Well, while he was at Huntington, West Virginia, there's a little guy always around named Brandon. At the time when Jaemyn got there, Brandon was like 8 years old. And Jaemyn was like 14, 15. And Brandon is the nephew of the head coach at Huntington Prep. And he was just always around the gym at practices and stuff, and kind of like the team mascot, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody knew him and dapped him up and, made him feel like he was a part of it. Well, Jaemyn just sort of took a liking in him and frankly saw a lot of himself in Brandon. They both grew up in single-parent homes. They both grew up with their fathers living out of the state in which they lived. They both had a lot of siblings. And they both maybe weren't getting the best guidance at home at one point in their life. Without getting too personal, neither one of them had the easiest early childhood. And so Jaemyn would just sort of took an interest in it. Hey man, you want to get some shots up? Hey, you want to throw a football? All right, jump on PS5 tonight. We'll play Fortnite. Well, eventually you graduate from high school. He went to Duke, and Brandon was left in Huntington, West Virginia with his mother. And Jaemyn was determined to keep in touch, to keep checking in, because at this point he had become something of a mentor to this young man. But you know how this stuff goes. Hey, yeah, man, I'll call you next week. And then you do that. And it's like, all right, we'll talk again next week. And then you skip a week, and then you skip a month, and then you ain't talked in 4 months, and then you haven't talked in 2 years. This is the way life goes. Think about it in your own life, Bennett. How many people do you see, you used to be close, whatever, and it's like, oh, yeah, we'll get together sometime, and then it doesn't happen. That's the way these things typically go. Not for Jaemyn, though. Went to Duke, kept in touch with Brandon, kept checking in, kept making sure he was trying to do the right thing in school. Hey, your grades all right? You brushing your teeth every morning? From a distance, but still trying to just show him somebody's thinking about you. Jaemyn plays 1 year at Duke, transfers to Ole Miss. When he started college, there were rules in place where if he took $10 from Mike Krzyzewski, it's a major violation. As he sits in college now as a fifth-year player, NIL is available. And he has a pretty lucrative NIL deal at Ole Miss. After last season, he's graduated. He didn't have to come back to school. He was weighing his options, professional options, transfer, everything. And when you have that kind of leverage, you can negotiate. And he negotiated a pretty nice NIL deal with Ole Miss. And so NIL is something we all talk about all the time. And coaches whisper about it. Fans yell about it. Some insist that it's ruined college athletics. And I acknowledge, and this is sort of the way I start the story, at CBS Sports Tech, I acknowledge like there's some issues with name, image, and likeness. Like it's not a perfect system, and there's some like it's not all great. There's a better way to do it. We need some more structure to it. But anybody out there talking about it's just ruining this and ruining that, you need to know this story. Because when Jaemyn secured, let's just say a 6-figure deal at Ole Miss to play basketball this year, he got an idea in his head. As Brandon was back in Huntington, West Virginia, again, without getting too personal, just things not going perfectly, right? And I talked to Brandon. And he told me in West Virginia is it's not a great situation. A lot of bad stuff to get into. And he wasn't maybe walking a straight line as well as he should have been. He'd put on a lot of weight, gotten a little heavy as a teenager. And Jaemyn saw this from a distance. And an idea popped in his head. He said, you know what, I got this a lot of money right now. More money than I've ever had. More money than most college people have. I guess I could go buy a car or a house and nice stuff. Or I could use this money, try to do something. And so here's his idea. Brandon, why don't you move to Oxford? Why don't you move from West Virginia to Oxford? Live with me. I'll raise you. I'll get you through high school. I'll change your life. And that's what he did. He moved this young man to Oxford with the blessing of the parents, of course. And now Brandon and Jaemyn are living together in a 2-story house in Oxford. He's a 24-year-old college student, a double-digit scorer for a nationally ranked team. And he gets up every morning at 7 and cooks breakfast, makes sure the homework's done, takes him to school, drops him off at 3:45, picks him up at school. Brandon told me when he gets into the car after school, first thing Jaemyn says is, how was your day? And do you have any homework? Same questions every day. And that sounds like nothing. But you know who that's not nothing to? A kid who isn't used to hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
This 16-year-old kid, it almost like made me get, you should just see his face light up when I asked him, so what's it like to have somebody ask you how your day was? He's like, man, you don't know how that makes a person feel. The implication was he hadn't heard that a lot. It just meant something for him to hear. I pick my boys up from school every day I can when I'm in town, and that's the first thing I say. How's your day, bud? How was your day? Did you have a good day? Tell me the best part. What's the best thing that happened today? It's a pretty normal thing for a lot of people, but you forget that there are kids out there who don't have that. They don't have a mom or a dad asking them how things going, if you can help you with anything. Brandon didn't have that the way that he needed it. Maybe that's the most polite way to put it. And Jaemyn decided I can be that person. I've got this money from NIL, and I can change this young person's life. Brandon's lost 50 pounds since he's moved to Oxford. 16 years old, he's lost 50 pounds since May just by changing his eating habits, by being in the gym. He's at Ole Miss practices all the time. He knows all the coaches. He knows all the players. He's like a part of their team the same way he used to be a part at Huntington Prep. And so I just was blown away by the maturity it takes to do something like this. At 24 years old, I couldn't do it. I told him that. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't even want to try. I'm too selfish, right? And yet here he is, 24 years old. He's got a lot of money. He's living in one of the great college towns in this country. He's got a lot of things he could be doing that run counter to raising a teenager who isn't yours. But he's decided, my brother was there for me when I needed a strong male role model in my life. These are his words, not mine. Why wouldn't I pay it forward? Why wouldn't I be that for somebody else? And it's funny, I sort of end the column. It's interesting when you ask questions and you think you know where the answers are going to come from, and then you just get an answer that you didn't even consider these would be the words that you hear. So I asked him at some point, I was like, man, like you're in a master's program, you're playing in an SEC schedule, you got pro basketball aspirations, you got a lot going on. Do you ever regret this? Do you ever regret doing this? Obviously, you're doing a great thing. You're changing a young person's life. But do you ever regret it? And what I expected was like, well, there are days when, woo. Isn't that the most natural thing to say? Well, there are days where I'm just overwhelmed, lost a basketball game, and rather than go home and get some rest or get in the gym and get some shots up, I got to go do homework with a junior in high school. Yeah, man, there are days where I wonder, what did I get myself into? That's what I thought I would hear. You know what he said? I said, do you ever have any regrets? And he said, yeah, I do. I said, okay, here we go. Here we go. This is interesting. You know what he said? You know what my regret is? I said, what? He said, I regret not doing this sooner. I regret not doing it earlier. Couldn't do it earlier. Didn't have the money to do it earlier. I asked him point blank, could you do this without NIL? No chance. No chance. I am able to do this because of NIL and only because of NIL. So next time you see somebody on Facebook or Twitter, wherever people express opinions, ranting and raving about how NIL has destroyed college athletics, just know that that's not entirely true. Has it complicated college athletics in some ways? Sure. Has it disrupted college athletics in a lot of ways? Absolutely. But it's also done some good. It's doing some good in Oxford, Mississippi. There's a 16-year-old right now at Oxford High who's had his life changed positively in a dramatic way. And it is only possible because the NCAA finally allowed college athletes to take whatever money somebody's willing to give them. You can find the story. It'll be up a little later on today, cbssports.com.